Well, I've just finished putting the stem onto the strongback. Now I've spent a good part of last week getting all of the mold stations aligned properly. So the important part about setting up a strongback is that all of the mold stations are parallel to one another and that they're all perpendicular to the strongback so that everything is all nice and squared up. And also that they are all follow the center line properly. Now, that might seem like a simple thing, but sometimes there's a little bit of fussing that you have to do in moving one forward, back a little bit, and so forth. Now, most of the time, strongbacks are set up and the stations are very equally spaced, and that's how most boat plans are designed. However, with the tender that I'm building here, I had to adjust that a little bit, mainly because of a couple of critical dimensions. So as you all know, this boat will sit upside down on the cabin roof of Arabella. So some of the critical dimensions are from the transom, which is right up against the end of the companionway, to the first bulkhead, which is the back seat. And from that seat to the center bulkhead seat, that dimension is also very critical so that the hatch will fit up inside of the boat at that point. So therefore, I've had to adjust the plans so to accommodate for that. So instead of having equal 10-inch stations, I've had to adjust a couple of those. So for example, you can see I have a 10-inch one here, but here it is 1 foot apart, and again another 1 foot, and then from station 5 and 4, it is 8 inches. So I've had to adjust all of those in order to get everything lined up properly. Now the other thing is that you can see that this space right here between 5 and 6 is left open. Now if you remember in episode 5, I talked about leaving these two stations out of there. What my plan was I'm going to make a center seat that has a bulkhead on each side so that that center seat not only will hold the dagger board for when you're sailing, but it also will be a air chamber or an airtight chamber or a locker, depending on how Steve wants to use it. So what my plan was is to create the dagger board and those two bulkheads first, and then place that onto the strongback. Now what I didn't calculate was that the seat will not go all the way to the sheer. In fact, it stops somewhere short, like up in here. So I was going to have to continue those molds farther anyway. So what I decided to do was to go ahead and make these two mold stations as a part of the temporary strongback. So you can see I've left it open here so that we can slide that dagger board, center seat, airtight chamber in there, and then that way I will fare it with the rest of the strongback. Now some of you will remember also in episode 5 that I talked about the mold placements in reference to the station lines. Now the way I set it up was that from the midship to the stem, I had put the mold stations 4 of the station line, and then vice versa from the midship to the transom. Now, many of you commented about that, and indeed you are correct, because there are 2 ways to set up mold stations. As it turns out, I'm having to do a hybrid of the 2 because of where I'm placing the bulkheads in there. So let's look at Greg Russell's book, The Boat Builder Apprentice. Here on page 211, Greg explains about the setting up of the molds. And he writes here, the structure of a mold is there only to support the station. This means that the plank will only be contacting one edge of the mold. So, as a general rule, for molds up forward from the stem to the widest part of the boat, set up the molds on the aft side of the station line. From the widest part of the boat to the transom, set up the molds on the forward side of the station line. He goes on to explain that on a frame, due to the bevel, the situation is reversed. Now he has a really great illustration of this here on page 213. Now this is the general rule that he was talking about, where the station mark is on the fore side of the station mold. And the reverse is true then on the aft end of the boat, where the station mold is on the fore side of the station line. And of course at midship it most generally is flat like this. So where the exception lies is here where you have a bevel. Now this is how I had set up the haven, and so that's why I originally had set up the tender that way. But you can see here that this situation is reversed, where the station line now is on the aft side of the mold, and that then it can be beveled. And the reverse then, of course, is true here on the aft side of the boat. And of course, in the center, it always pretty much stays the same. So let me show you how that lays out on the boat. Okay, you can see what I've done here is I've put a batten here right at the shear line on the boat. So if we look back here at stations 8 through 10, we can see this is exactly like what Gray was talking about, where this is the station mark right here, and that the mold then is on the fore side of the station mark at the aft end of the boat. You can see that there's very little space in between there, and for that reason is why I decided that the molds didn't need to be beveled at all on this aft end of the boat. Now you can see that what I have is this lined up exactly with the station 9 mark. Now you can see up here at the bow of the boat, I have a different situation where I have the mold station on the aft side of the mold because it needed to be beveled. The same thing is true here with station 1. So I've got station 1 and station 2 here. So again, I've got another batten put here at the shear, so you can see that when I put that on there, it conforms with that bevel perfectly. The same thing will be true with the stem here, where I've already beveled a little bit of that so that that will sit on there properly. Now the way that I'm doing that is I have this Japanese rasp that I will just go on and then ferret out that way. So what I'll do is I'll move this batten up at several points on here and then ferret out these two stations. Now, why I'm move those stations this way, well, let me show you right here. So I'm over here now at station 2, where this bulkhead that is this 5/8 plywood will go on here. So you can see what I will have to do is once I've ferreted out the batten here, I will then need to take this bulkhead and ferret it to the same bevel. That way, this will stay in the boat once I'm planking it, and this part will come out of the boat. So what I'm going to do next is I'm going to take that batten and put it all across the boat at many different locations to make sure that the entire boat is nice and fair. So in some cases it might mean that I'll need to shave a little bit off. It also might mean that I need to put a little shim if it's a little bit too low. So that's what I'm going to do next. Well, I've got the initial fairing of the hull all completed now. Now what I did was I used several of the planking strips as battens to check its fairness. That way I know that when I actually put the planking on there, that it'll fare out nicely. So there's a couple of other little tweaks that I'll need to make once I get those bulkheads in there, but for now I think I'm pretty happy with how fair it is. So the next step then is to work on the transom. And you can see that I've got some boards in here that measure the proper angle for the transom. So what I need to do next is to get a piece of thin plywood on there and to use the battens planks against there and scribe out exactly what the shape of that transom should be. Well, some of you may have noticed that I've got this great big sailboat in my shop. Well, what that is a DM class sailboat that was constructed by my friend Steve Colburn. Now, some of you may have remembered him from past episodes where he's helped me do some metal lathe work on some of the parts for the Haven. Well, Steve built this boat back in the mid-50s when he was about 15 or 16 years old. And it's been in storage for nearly 60 years. So this winter, he has decided that he wanted to get it out and get it on the ice again. So he asked me if he could set it up for a couple of days in the shop so that he could make sure all of the parts worked well. So Steve and I will explain all of the parts about this boat in a future video and hopefully get some footage of him actually sailing it out on some ice. So let's get busy on that transom. So now I've got the plywood attached on here. What I'm going to do is take one of the planks and put it across the last 3 stations here and then make a mark on the top of it. And I'm going to do that several places. So the plank is 3/8 of an inch, and then I will be able to subtract that 3/8 in order to make my pattern. I've got the transom pattern all placed on there and pretty much fine-tuned. So now when I put the batten on here, I can see that it runs on the transom and on at least the first 3 stations here. So it looks really good. So the next step is to take it off and to get some mahogany and start working on gluing up a blank for the transom. So I found a couple of 3/4 inch thick pieces of mahogany. I don't have a lot of pieces that are that thick. I've got lots of 1/2 inch thick. So I need to make them out of these 2 pieces. Now, the transom pattern here, there's a couple of fairly big holes here that I can actually plug up. But if I make that the center where the rudder will go, then that basically leaves me with around, well, it looks maybe, well, this tapered, so it comes somewhere around 6 inches. And this piece here is actually 3.5. And My distance this way is was 38.5, so a strong 39 will work. And the length of this is 80.5. So I have more than enough material that I can cut this piece in half and use this top style of this. Looks like it was a cabinet door face. And then trim this up because it's got a curve to it right now, and square that up. And the other thing I noticed on the back side here is that it is actually, there's another piece that it's been added. So I'm going to take that off because I don't know how well that was fastened to it. So that's the next step, is I'm going to start processing these down so I can see where I come out with my blank. So now I've got the mahogany blank all planed down and smooth. What I need to do is to find the center, which is where these holes are. So I'll mark that, a little tick. And then transfer that to the top. And we can lay out our pattern now on there, just like that. Okay, mark it out and we'll get it cut out. So before I can attach the transom to the strongback, I need to cut out the stern post, which is what will hold it in place. So I've got a piece of ash here in my pattern. So what I'm going to do is mark out, I'm going to leave a little bit here, that way I can adjust it if it needs to be. I'll mark this out, and I'll just cut it off probably here. Now this piece of ash is 1.5 inches thick, and what I need is a 1-inch piece of timber. So I'm going to cut this general shape out and then run this through the planer. The stern post is 1 inch thick, so in order to get it to set into these molds, I need to mark out a 1-inch strip that I need to cut out of the stations. So I realized that on this last station here that it needs to be cut all the way through, so I'm attaching this other brace on here so that I don't have to worry about it giving way this direction. So that's what I'm doing right now. So now that I've got that all secured, I can now take a saw and cut those pieces out of there. So now that I've got the transom and the stern knee in here, I'm going along and I'm going to bevel the transom and then take a plank strip here and make sure that that bevel matches that perfectly. So I'm going to continue to do that and keep checking it on around, and then we'll be all ready with the back end, be all faired and ready. So the next thing that needs to be done is to build the center bulkheads and dagger board slot. So that's what we'll do next week. In the meantime, I'm going to continue fairing this out. As always, thanks for watching. And remember, if you're going to make it beautiful.